Dan Winter.
Nice to be with you, Roger. Long time. All good.
Yep. It's been a while since I've been over to your place, but we have been hanging out for about something like 25 years, doing up to all sorts of tricks and trades.
Many projects, breakthrough technologies, lots of good stuff.
Yep. So what this session is about, folks, is we've got this amazing UK summer retreat coming up in July, and Dan is an online presenter there, and we've got over 10 international teachers. We're doing a whole variety of workshops, and the Verify, Quantify is there. And so we're just going to take you through a quick little presentation of that first, but then what we're hanging out for is to hear Dan talk about what's the idea, what's the concept of oneness. And it's something that we all throw around all the time, but we really do have a very, very good scientific language for this. We have beautiful spiritual and philosophical language that a lot of us are involved in. For instance, my background is Taoism. And so the Tao, the infinite Tao and yin and yang gets us through our day. And Dan has these very, very important concepts that basically put our spiritual, languages into science, a science sort of context. So that's what we're up to. We're going to define, what is oneness, how does oneness work, and then take you through things like implosion, action at a spooky distance, as Einstein would say, and we'll look at some of the technologies that we're involved in. So Dan, I'm going to switch over to our presentation.
Great, to PowerPoint, great.
Here we go, folks. So here's the wonderful summer retreat. Paul Harris is going to be there with the Verify, and the website is longitudinalwellnessretreat.com, and just an amazing, beautiful, state-of-the-art retreat center. I would call it the premium retreat center of England now. We've got like a 900-year-old tradition here, along with, a $6 million Avalon cutting-edge spa, with the pool and the sauna, and 3,000 acres of just gorgeous Yorkshire Dales farmland. So we're doing a theme of food as medicine and Taoist tonic medicine, and a farm to table experience, superfoods, Ayurvedic, biohacking, and of course we'll have the Verify there. We're going to have a Quantify dance party and cacao ceremony, and you name it, it's happening. Here's a few little quick pictures of this gorgeous retreat, and
wow, that spa looks
sampling of, yeah, it's amazing. I've been there a couple of times now. It really is great,
amazing,
and very, very supportive of what we're doing. And so it's their first sort of food as medicine retreat that they're holding here, so they're very excited about having us here. We've got a wonderful exercise program in the morning, yoga, qigong, barefoot doctor experience. It really is about educating people so they don't get degenerative disease. And if they do have ailments and imbalances, etc., we'll take you through a whole longevity diet protocol and how you can heal yourself. All the faculty of the Academy Healing Nutrition is going to be there, along with Paul Harris and Kelly, and of course the wonderful Inga doing her tonic herbal classes, and good old Paul Harris with he'll be doing some lectures on structured water, understanding the revolutionary Verify, the Quantify, and also we've been involved with developing the Testatron, which is based on Guy Oberlinski's lifetime work. All of that's up on the website, which has a beautiful brochure. And Dan is going to be doing this very, very interesting presentation about what does it really mean that there is this sort of idea and feeling and concept of infinite oneness. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan, because this is kind of like our first slide here, Dan. What does it really mean for you, this idea of oneness?
Well, it's very appropriate conversation. Obviously, it's a beautiful spiritual conversation. The new information it's also beautiful physics. And, you know, oneness is experienced electrically. Specifically, the unified field idea about oneness means that essentially everything is electrical. So in what way are we electrically one? And how is that
Right.
spiritual? And we start with, you know, papers in the physics literature are becoming very common now. My friend Mei-Wan Ho wrote a paper about the fact that actually the nature of the metric of space-time itself is golden ratio fractality, is the very nature of space-time. So how does that lead to an idea of oneness? Well, when we realize that a perfected distribution of charge, which is how oneness propagates, actually is in a 3D fractal. We call it the Star Mother kit, stellata, dodeca, ecosa, all based on golden mean ratio. And the physics is that the compression which is enabled at those nodes enables a cascade of compression of charge, which is called impedance matched to what's called the longitudinal array. The still points in the array, the golden ratio very nature of fractal spacetime, the still points in that array, and they fit that beautiful fractal flower-like rose picture, are where transverse electrical inertia is compressed and gets organized into the more coherently propagated longitudinal EMF, sometimes called scalar, a compressional wave where the wave direction of propagation is the same as the direction of wave compression. So the wave nature of the compressions is parallel to the direction of propagation in a longitudinal wave, which means that when those waves of compression arrive symmetrically, they can get fractal and enable implosion to that still point. Now, this sounds a bit sort of theoretical, but supposing you get out of your electrosmog city and sit on your beautiful park bench in a sacred stone circle of trees somewhere, and suddenly you feel this amazing still point experience. Your hair stands up, you start to have bliss. Well, the reason that is the physics of oneness is because the waves can agree at those nodes of compression. So for me, oneness is defined by the physics of Planck, which is the musical key signature of the universe. And at that wavelength of Planck, the compression nodes of transverse EMF converge, implode into a pine cone where the vortex kiss noses, and they enable that distribution of charge from the longitudinal nodes. And that's also then going to get into, I think, Roger's next question, which is about action at a distance. So, but the point is that the oneness experience is that distribution of charge, which means that only if you embed into that stillness can you cohere the pressure continuum. Yes, Roger, please read the question.
Well, the pressure continuum, I thought that is, the cohering the pressure continuum. I thought that was a beautiful expression for. So look, tell us your thoughts on the ether, and tell us your thoughts on, 0 point energy before we go on to these complementary forces. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, very appropriate. So what we're saying is the unified field is a contiguous compressible media which behaves like a superfluid and is comprised of what is called charge. So plus and minus charge are simply compression and rarefaction in what you could call the ether, which is a continuous pressure continuum. And that pressure is named voltage, for example. And cohering that means that the distribution of pressures in that array get fractal, and then they perfect that distribution, and that sets up literally DNA radio, the collective unconscious. And the nature of the nodes of that fractal are the longitudinal EMF coherent compressional nodes, where on sacred sites, for example, Bruce Cathy measured reduced nuclear critical mass, and Korotkov measured enabled telepathy. So literally, since it has been measured that telepathy is only enabled at those nodes, cohering the pressure continuum, you could say literally by measurement, it is proven that the experience of oneness is enabled by embedding in the stillness at those nodes. So that is the unified field.
Okay, so obviously this beautiful sense of oneness is operated through these complementary forces, and of course some of us call that yin and yang. And then you have centripetal, centrifugal, which relates to entropy, negentropy. A lot of the technologies that you and I and Paul and in one sense, we've been pioneers of this idea of negentropy. So just tell us a little bit how these forces operate in the universe that we live in.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that Roger was teaching about yin and yang when we were very young.
That's right. And we
and
still are young.
that's the point. And we got young because we learned that centripetal forces are negentropic, which is self-organizing, literally time reversal, which is what we do when we implode. So yeah, that is the point, that what was called yin and yang, or should still be called yin and yang, identifies directly with good physics, which is that plus and minus charge as compression versus rarefaction are literally centripetal versus centrifugal. The point is that up until our recent work, physics did not know the cause of any centripetal force, for example, gravity or consciousness. But now we know what causes the centripetal force, which then causes the implosive negentropy. And what causes centripetal force, actually, physics had agreed. They called it non-destructive collapse. Actually, perfected charge collapse is conventional physics understanding of the cause of gravity. And at the same time, conventional physics says perfected charge collapse is the cause and result of consciousness. But what no one in physics up until my new book knew was the cause of that charge collapse. Therefore, they didn't know the cause of gravity of consciousness or consciousness. The cause of perfected charge collapse is named PlanckFire.com, PlanckPhire.com, my fifth book. And it's very simple. You take this musical key signature of the universe, Planck, you multiply by powers of golden ratio called fire, the flame of Planck, and that is the geometry of the implosive collapse, which we now have proven is the geometry of hydrogen, the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, the geometry of every single negentropic frequency in the body, from the Schumann harmonics to the brainwave harmonics. So we now know the cause of perfect charge collapse, PlanckFire.com. Therefore, we know the cause of gravity and consciousness and all centripetal and negentropic forces. And yes, calling it expansion and contraction is another way of using the language. The point is that once you identify that perfected geometry of charge collapse, you take Planck times powers of golden ratio. For example, you get the definition of all sacred dimensions, both time and length. For example, the British foot, et cetera. And our new golden ratio ruler is going to be scaled to Planck fire. Oh. So the definition of sacred dimension is enabled charge collapse, because enabled charge collapse is the definition of sacred space, because that's what causes the negentropy and the bliss.
Well, some of those references were put up in the, this seminar notes,
Great.
some of those websites for the folks who are listening. Let's move on. So this idea of longitudinal scalar waves is really, would you say that's the secret to really understanding our whole sense of non-local spooky, what Einstein called spooky action?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Not only are you stuck with calling action at a distance spooky, like Einstein had that problem, but also you pretty much cannot have a clue of any spiritual story unless you know the physics of action at a distance, how to pray, how to dream, how the dream spell works. And so it is critical that once you understand that the still point nodes in that array, where the compression lines make a still point, enabling what's called the longitudinal EMF array, incorrectly called scalar waves, that those compression waves, where they make those still points, they create the leverage to enable a distribution wherein, for example, in the physics of stargates and portals, at those still points, a harmonic series of golden ratio multiples times the speed of light, as measured by Professor Raymond Chow, that the more compression that arrives at that node, the more harmonics golden ratio times the speed of light propagates simultaneously. And that is the physics of superluminal action at a distance. For example, the Stargate in the heart of the trapezium of Orion, the subject of 10,000 years of Orion wars, that Stargate goes farther because that's where the compressions converge. And so there's more harmonics of golden ratio times the speed of light, which, by the way, is about the only actual definition of going to the next dimension, which is where more axes of spin symmetry are superposed. So in very simple terms, when Jean-Charles Moyen replicably, repeatedly bilocated with witnesses, and we measured his brain waves and got that golden ratio cascade from alpha to gamma, we know exactly the physics of that action at a distance, which actually was the same brainwave signature we got with the kids who could see without their eyes, but John Charles was much higher amplitude. You can see all that at flameinmind.com/lucidbrain. The point is that embedding and compressing in that array, you literally turn inside out at the focal point and enable distribution in that array. And that's the introduction to action at a distance. You could even think very practically, the same kids who learned to see without their eyes with that implosive brainwaves, they were at that moment also seeing their ancestors, freak their parents out. But the physics of clairvoyance is that longitudinal coherence. And that's also going to introduce Roger's next slide on this series about how you get through death.
Yeah, that we come to that. That's the grand finale of our little presentation here, how we get through death. So just tell us a little bit about the golden mean ratio.
Yeah, well, everyone knew that the golden mean was the definition of beauty, but no one knew the physics of the golden mean ratio until our team, it was Martin Jones, Bill, Elizabeth Donovan, and myself, wrote the paper in which we proved by the generalized wave equations that golden mean ratio is the perfection of non-destructive wave interference in general. In other words, another way to say it is the perfect form of constructive wave interference in general, first on a line and then in 3D, is by equation proven to be golden mean ratio. So that's the reason golden mean ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital gravity mechanics, is because constructive compression, constructive wave interference, defined by golden ratio, defines the implosion of charge, which causes acceleration of charge towards center, named the gravity. So once you understand that implosion of charge is only enabled by golden ratio, because that is the perfect form of constructive wave interference, and constructive compression is the solution to almost every problem physics has ever known, alchemy, gravity, urban design, history of computing, this is all a name for the solution to compression. So once you understand the solution to compression, by the way, that's also going to take us to the solution to death.
Okay. So now, I don't think particles are really real, are they, Dan?
Well, particle was an illusory concept. Now anyone in physics will tell you for sure that the idea of a particle was a mistake. Whoever invented particles should apologize. I mean, whoever invented cities should
particleize.
No, but it's not that it's not a useful concept. It's illusory in the sense that what had been called a particle was the discrete wave inertia contained in a packet or an envelope of waves. And the quantization of that envelope is solved by golden ratio and geometry. For example, Platonic geometry is every electron shell, every nuclear hadron, and even the geometry of planetary orbitals is all based on nesting of Platonic solids, the star mother. So the illusion that there was a particle arose because when waves compress, they store their inertia coherently in envelopes, which are quantized by Planck, and we measure the amount of inertia quantized in that wave envelope, and we call that mass. So the fact that particles had mass was merely that the standing wave held in that envelope a certain amount of inertia, the only definition of mass.
Right, got it. Okay, you've mentioned Planck's length a little bit, but just take us through that again.
Yes, so what I discovered when I wrote the new equation proving how hydrogen is fractal and therefore how hydrogen makes gravity, which is new information, I discovered that if you take Planck and multiply by exact whole number exponents of golden ratio, powers of golden ratio, you get 3 absolutely precise hydrogen radii. You can see all this at fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. So hydrogen is literally a fractal of Planck fire stellation to Planck. I was the one who wrote that original equation. And then later we say that that same equation, Planck times golden ratio, gives you the most important frequencies in the body: the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, the key signature of the brain waves during bliss, the key signature of the Schumann harmonics, the only exact, precise 2 frequencies which enable photosynthesis. We proved that photosynthesis only exists because it's fractal conjugate to Planck. That's the reason photosynthesis exists. There's only 2 very narrow notches of color wavelength that make photosynthesis, and they happen to be exactly golden ratio times Planck. This is a smoking gun. And then you have Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precessional year, and hundreds, dozens of other negentropic wave phenomena, which are all golden ratio times Planck, called planckfire.com, the structure of universal fractality, therefore the structure of all negentropic centripetal forces and the nature of oneness.
Very good. Thank you for that. This is a controversial area. And of course, a lot of people in physics don't agree with this, but there have been several experiments done, right? Proving that we can actually, this whole idea of just accelerating, using golden mean ratio, it takes you, beyond the speed of light. But there's still this huge resistance that superluminal waves just do not exist. It's like they're sort of stuck in the box, aren't they?
Well, it actually was Guy Oblensky, the same teslatron, who was measuring faster than light velocities in optical fiber waveguides in his lab. That I was there with him in that. And then it became actually fairly well known now. It's accepted that measurements of faster than light velocities are very common. The interesting, and I think most important point here is that in the many thousands of measurements of faster than light velocities made by the famous Professor Raymond Chow, virtually every single one of those measurements was between 1.5 to 1.7 times c, the speed of light, centering almost exactly on golden ratio 1.618 times c, the speed of light. And there is a smoking gun. The way through the speed of light is the constructive interferometry, which fractal golden ratio allows. And that explains why golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all gravity orbital mechanics. So the speed of light was not a speed limit, but passing through the speed of light and not encountering destructive interference required golden ratio. And that implosion is the cause of gravity. So once you understand the cause of gravity, you can understand the way through the speed of light and the way through stargates.
Okay, so you've been upgrading the imploder.com, and the ultra imploder is now on the market, correct?
Yes. So then we're shipping the upgraded super imploder now, and we have been shipping for about a year or so the ultra imploder. The ultra imploder is solid stainless, 1-inch, commercial rated, very high pressure rated. And yes, so the imploder line now has 4 items: the imploder shower, the tri-imploder, the super imploder, and the ultra imploder, all at the imploder.com. And the results are pouring in. Everybody, even just in the shower, people feel the charge density. Remember, it's dramatically greater if the water is hard water, because that vortex then is piezo. Okay, and so it's implosive capacitively. So these devices work super well with people who have hard water, for example. And that perfected distribution enables hydration solubility. Remember, hydration is the issue of many, if not most, diseases. So the imploder is one good example of our vortex technologies based on golden ratio, yes.
And you've been a pioneer of biofeedback for many decades now.
Yes, we have about 6 biofeedback apps on the App Store, with acknowledgement here to our wonderful programmer, Patrick Bauty. So flameinmind.com might be the premier now. It's golden ratio measurements in brainwaves, but then you can also measure life force, and you can measure lucid dreaming triggers, and it's incredibly powerful. And now you can measure the infrasound coupling between your breath infrasound sacrocranial harmonics and your brainwave directly with flameinmind.com and the life force measure there. So it's super powerful. And the original iThrive.com, ithrve.com, which is HRV. And then there's iThrive Chakras and iThrive Stress Management. And so, yeah, we have about 6 apps on the App Store, and they're growing all the time. And there will be more soon.
Oh, it's good. Now, and of course, you're on the team of the Urangara Cold Fusion project. And this is, there's about 5 on the team. And both of us have got a long, long history now being involved with cold fusion and low energy nuclear reactions. Just a quick little summary of your thoughts on cold fusion and its potential.
Yes, well, it's really Elizabeth Donovan who wrote the equations showing that once you know that non-destructive charge collapse basically defines cold fusion, then you can actually write equations which predict the actual critical temperature and frequency to catalyze isotope transition between any 2 commercially valuable isotopes. For example, aluminum to silver, we know the temperature and frequency. So originally, Roger's partners were working with nickel and copper. And so these isotope transitions now are much better understood, and we have a much better understanding of the hadrons, of the nature of the isotopes in the sequence of those transitions, and know the temperatures and pressures to optimize and regulate. And you can make a frequency signature, which will catalyze that charge collapse, as also we did for hydrogen. So it's quite a story, and it's evolving beautifully, and exciting things are happening.
Well, folks can read more about that up in urangara.com. It gives you an overview. And let's have a look here. Is this the last slide? Well, is this the last slide? Is there life after death, Dad?
Well,
or is there death after life?
I mean, that's really what we're saying now. It's a beautiful spiritual mystery, but we insist now that as electrical engineers, we can tell you this is not a mystery. Nope, it ain't. In fact, it has been published now that the frequencies identifying triggered lucid dreaming actually correlate to the frequencies generated by Therify.net, which is a documented lucid dreaming trigger replicated. You know, we can help trigger lucid dreaming, which fits the physics literature on what frequencies trigger lucid dreaming. Now, what does that have to do with death? Everything. I mean, it's long been said that if you can lucid dream, you can take memory through death. And I'm here to explain that physics. So what happens is, as in when you have that trance experience, the bliss experience, the Therify experience, you access the compression event, and the body's transverse field goes through that squeezing process and begins to spit out more coherently the longitudinal interferometry, which the Tibetans called the rainbow light body, Gurdjieff called the Kesjan body. Everybody had a name for it, but the Egyptians called it the Ba from the Ka. What's the physics? The physics is when you emit that longitudinal coherence and you propagate in that array, sometimes called heaven, the collective unconscious, planes of Sharon, Hey Ave. So the process of getting coherent in the longitudinal array, as Roger would know, when you watch the indigenous peoples in Australia, the Aboriginals, they're sitting there, you think they're sleeping, but their eyes are closed and they're moving clouds down a song line 100 miles away. So that magnetic line has become a family pet, the songline dreaming track, which is a longitudinal array, and they're inhabiting, embedding, and getting leverage in that array. And so that ability to get still and have leveraged compression on a center point in the array, literally how a shaman steers a tornado, that is the beginning of all immortality. In fact, it is the only physics of ensoulment, the last word on the chart here. So we say very specifically that implosion in brainwaves bliss, the implosion in recursive DNA braiding, the implosion in the heart creates that converged center point that propagates coherently into the longitudinal array. And that torus field is the coherence you take with you when you remote view, outer body experience, when you lucid dream, and when you die. Remember, The children who see without their eyes after bliss experience, they all say the same thing. They say, oh, I saw a little vortex tube appear inside my head. I'm blindfolded. And a pinhole vortex opens inside their head when they had trance bliss. And then that tornado forms an eyeball and they can see through it. Now, that is the only real description of the physics of consciousness on this planet. That vortex of plasma. That's the only physics of consciousness. Because, every single physicist now believes these hundreds of medical doctors who've reported their out-of-body experiences. So anybody who's got to talk about consciousness has to include, how does consciousness go out of your body? Well, this is how. You set up that plasma vortex, that tornado, and you see through that eyeball and that plasma coherence. By the way, the medical doctors who documented being outside their body during near-death experience, not one of them looked at their body from outside their body, from inside an aluminum metal box. No, there's certain places where that plasma cannot propagate because there's certain places that inhibit the longitudinal array. So once you know the physics of what goes outside your body and how you generate the coherence to go there, you get the flavor. That's my enthusiasm.
It's contagious, Dan. It's contagious.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you very much. And we'll see everybody at the UK summer retreat held up in Yorkshire. And it's the longevitywellnessretreat.com. And it's happening in July. And Dan is going to be there as an online presenter, and we'll be learning a lot more about all of these concepts from Dan. So thank you,
Yes.
Dan. And I'll be
I can answer questions that time. And I want to thank Roger for a whole lifetime of dedication to this work. And he's still young. It's all cool.
Okay. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao. Blessings.
you